At Smarter E 2025, energy storage industry is fully charged up. It is becoming evident, and it's already clear to us all here in the halls, energy storage is a critical infrastructure, no longer just a sidekick. And the way we deploy these assets today will define Europe's energy future. Paul McCusker, EMEA President at Fluence. Thank you for joining us today.
Great to be here. Also great to be back at Intersolar. There's a real buzz this year. So much continued new developments, new product developments. We're also delighted to be here this year with our new Smart Stack product. We see huge interest, and it's an exciting time for the industry here in Europe.
What do you see as the hottest topics at this year's show?
As I noted, I think the pace of change, innovation in storage continues really at a pace that always surprises people. We've seen a lot over the last year. I think that's going to continue. Smart Stack, our new platform, is a great way to tap into that. The future storage is a lot about the intelligence that we bring, bringing more value to customers, and I think we can surprise customers with the additional value that we can see with all these new developments.
You recently met with Ursula von der Leyen in Brussels and other high-level officials. What was the occasion?
Yes, I was there a few weeks back in Brussels as part of the American Chamber of Commerce, the executive committee. We were meeting actually around the week when the tariffs were all kicking off, so it was a very interesting time to be in Brussels. And one thing that took me back from, which was interesting takeaway from meeting with President von der Leyen, the President of the European Council, Costa, and also the President of the European Parliament, was the awareness around the importance around energy security. It's only a few years ago that we had the economic shock following the invasion in Ukraine and the disruption around gas, and I think there's the memories of that and the implications of that are really still hot on the minds of policymakers. We are in the middle of an energy transition. We're also seeing trade conflicts kicking off in the world, and the relationship that we have in Europe with other trading blocs is changing. And I think as part of this change, there is an awareness that energy security needs more attention. Specifically, coming back to that disruption after the Ukraine invasion, the gas disruption really highlighted a dependency on fossil fuels. We're offsetting that dependency now by accelerating renewables, accelerating storage on the grid, which allows us to reduce the amount of imported fossil fuels. Is good for Europe. But we need to be really careful that we don't replace a fossil fuel geopolitical dependency with a supply chain geopolitical dependency. And there's a real concern there. We've seen it on the solar side, where we have a very high concentration. It's just not a healthy thing for energy security for a critical infrastructure to have that. So I think there's an awareness and a concern. I heard that from all the top policymakers. There are measures underway to look at how we alleviate that. There's also measures at the European level to monitor trade inflows. There's a big concern about dumping of product that was highlighted on all those meetings. And I know President von der Leyen mentioned that Europe is monitoring imports at ports to just make sure there's we maintain a fair trading environment. But specifically on storage, I think there's a cybersecurity component that we've seen reports from different bodies recently highlighting this as cybersecurity is a cornerstone of energy security, and there are regulations some in place, some forming in Europe and in member states, actions being taken to make sure that as we deploy storage over the coming years, that we deploy it with a real clear lens on cyber security.
And how far are we in Europe with establishing clear cybersecurity standards, and how harmonized are they across Europe?
Yeah, I think there's definitely work to be done here. There are standards like NIS2 that are out there, and our customers have Some customers have a high level of awareness, some it's totally new to them. But I think we're generally, the US has had cybersecurity for clean tech industries on its radar for some time, and not just the current administration, it's been many years. So there's a much higher political awareness in the US around these topics. It's changing in Europe. We see actions in the UK, in Germany, in a related industry, in the telecoms industry, where 5G, let's say suppliers that are deemed as untrustworthy or of a concern, they're now removing that content. So you've actually gone through, deployed, and made investments, and now you're having to replace components because of a deemed vulnerability. These are examples that are now on the minds of regulators, and that specific example, when I talk to people in Brussels, it's very real. I think we need to be super careful that we don't replicate that problem only at a much larger scale. Like this, to put it in numbers, by 2030, we're forecast to deploy 90 gigawatt of storage on our grid in Europe. That's equivalent to 90 nuclear power stations. It's critical. These are critical infrastructure assets, and our grid is changing over this time. We need to stand here in 2030 and look back and say, hey, we did this, we did a good job. We haven't created, we did it to a critical infrastructure standard. And that's what's, so to answer your question, I think the awareness is increasing. It's not consistent across markets in Europe yet, and certainly not across customers. Customers that have, let's say, been more traditional utilities or former utilities or TSOs have a high level of awareness, and we see customer requirements coming through with 20, 30 pages of very detailed standards and expectations. But then you see some newer maybe developers who they don't really appreciate this topic yet. And that's where we need to do a better job on policy awareness and standards at government, at country and EU level. I think that will come in the near future.
Yes, and also the recent report from Solar Power Europe, it found that only 3 gigawatt of inverter power capacity disrupted assets would pull the entire grid down.
Yes, yeah, it's a real topic. I had a conversation with a grid operator quite recently, and they told me almost a very similar story, how at a certain point on a sunny day, their grid is you got all this solar power that's running, and they've operational control concerns around the inverters in that aspect. So this is a real topic, and there are steps that we can take. We need to, and some countries have already taken steps. Lithuania is maybe a good example. They've set a threshold, and above that threshold, operational control cannot be in a country of concern. So, the US are further ahead on this. In Europe, we're starting to see the first countries or member states taking a position. Some customers are also taking a position already, but we need to be more consistent.
On the political level, could it be that this involves some kind of a limitation of remote control for the original vendor?
Absolutely. I think a sensible position, and again, we're talking about critical infrastructure. So, critical infrastructure is part of the sovereignty of our country, that we control that. We need to retain operational control within our member states, but we certainly cannot have it with countries of concern. And this countries of concern definition, I think, will get more body to it. The US have different terms that are legal terms now and going through their legal process. I think we'll see more of that in Europe. But operational control should not be with a country where we have a concern over how they might act. But also beyond that, the IT and OT software and the hardware of the intelligence of the system, we need to be confident that they're developed in a cyber secure manner. Again, it can't be countries of concern if you want to deploy critical infrastructure. So,
is that something that the EU officials have confirmed as well?
I think there's a growing awareness and concern in some of these areas that hasn't been fully defined yet. But I do know there's certain customers take a very clear view on that, and so let's say the more customers that are aware of the risk and maybe have had an experience, then they choose not to take that risk. And I guess an important point in this is not about, we need to think of energy security and cybersecurity as just a sensible risk management approach to de-risk your project. We're here to, from an asset owner perspective, you want to protect your revenues. Your revenues are not protected if you have a vulnerability on operational control, or if your asset gets it gets brought offline, if there's repair that needs to be done, or if you need to replace IT, OT software or components. All of those things lead to lost revenue. And the other aspect is compliance. We know from the discussion and what we see, policymakers are building more stringent regulations into the future. So, we worked all the different cybersecurity standards and ISO standards. It's important to look where things are headed to avoid compliance risks in the future. And there's some pretty significant fines if you don't do that. So the point here is not to scaremonger about cybersecurity, as some might think. It's just think of it as a risk that you got to manage like any other risk with your asset.
Is there an expected timeline when we can see these new standards in place?
It's always hard to say with the political side. I'm not the best one to comment on that, but I do think that this is a relatively pressing topic because the ambition here in Europe is undimmed around the speed at which we want to deploy renewables and storage. So I would expect over the next months, maybe a year, that each time we'll progressively start to see a clearer picture. And we see that from customers. We see a customer change in the last year where we're definitely seeing a stronger, more questions being asked, some very detailed, deep questions on these topics. So I think the awareness is building. The policy is lagging a little bit, but I expect that it'll firm up in the next year or so.
Thank you very much. Paul McCusker, EMEA President at Fluence. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Great to meet you.